Hello and welcome to FTD Talk. My name is John James and I am a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence and an advocate for men's mental health. This week on FTD Talk, I talked to Philip W. Cook about the sexual assault and rape of men by women. It's a fascinating conversation. Absolutely love talking to Philip, and I hope you enjoy it too. I hope you find it interesting. But before we go, don't forget to press that like button on YouTube, smash that subscribe button. The bigger the channel gets, the more people I can help. You take care of yourself, take care of each other. Peace. Okay, well, hi Philip and welcome to FTD Talk.
Oh, nice to be with you. Thank you.
Before we begin, can you tell me a little bit about who Philip Cook is?
Sure. I'm a former radio and television news director and broadcaster, anchor, so on, for almost 20 years. And then I left daily broadcasting after winning, a couple of nice awards and stuff, and got into nonprofit work, actually, with an outfit called the PACE Institute for Families in Transition, basically helping people get through a divorce, especially those with children. And that went on for quite a while. I was able to pass a bill in the state of Oregon, which mandated children in divorce classes for all parents with minor children who were divorcing. So that was a pretty significant accomplishment, and the bill allowed judges to decide whether or not to hold such classes per county. And nowadays, the great majority of counties in the state of Oregon do hold such classes, which of course prevents parental alienation, using the children as weapons against each other, and that kind of thing. Gives people a skill set.
Yeah.
But it was controversial at the time because you had to, it forced parents to attend these classes. And boy, I tell you, most of them sure resented it. But once they completed the course, the survey showed that the parents said, you know what, that was pretty darn useful.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty cool accomplishment, I thought.
Awesome.
And nowadays I'm with the Global Initiative for Boys and Men. And we have basically two purposes. One is the Boys and Men's Well-Being Index, something that's never been done before any place, basically calculating the effects of policy and health and so on and so forth on boys and men, suicide rates, opioid deaths, measuring all those things in considerable detail. And distinguished British medical journal, The Lancet, said just this last year, such a study was really needed because it's never been done. And then the second thing is getting commissions for boys and men in various states that would equal those already established for women and girls. It just seems the fair thing to do, interesting concept. The exciting news there is that in the state of Washington, which is where I live and where we are headquartered, although we have members in other states as well, that a bill has been introduced in the state legislature just recently to create such a commission for boys and men to equal that of our ones already established for women and girls. Hasn't got out of committee yet. We'll know pretty soon whether it will or won't. So that was some interesting developments, and it's I'm really pleased actually to be involved with that group because there are people younger than me. Great.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing for men and boys. Sure. And we're here to talk today about sexual assault of men by women. And
Yes.
what I want to ask first is, because I know that you haven't been through abuse or anything like that. So
No, no, it's
what
not
brought you to the
personal with me.
subject?
I take it as a journalism, just trying to be as objective as possible and examine issues that simply have never been addressed before. Abusement, the hidden side of domestic violence was the very first book to discuss that part of the issue. And when women sexually abuse men, also the very first book, and still the only one
Yeah.
regarding that.
There seems to be a confusion over what rape is. Like, there's many definitions, but the one constant is it seems to be gendered. Am I right?
Yes, it's forced penetration
Mm-hmm.
is, the most commonly used definition. Obviously, that leaves out forced envelopment in terms of a definition of the law,
Yeah.
and in terms of survey questions, for example. So that's left out. What I think the very first thing one needs to say about rape, for example, is, well, it seems at first glance impossible, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're fear and afraid, how you going to have an erection? However, if I could step through this screen right now and stomp on your toe really hard, and even though you knew it was coming in advance, could you prevent yourself from saying ouch?
No.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's a physical reaction,
Yeah.
even under a fear component. However, in talking to this district attorney who prosecuted a rape case against two women in Spokane, Washington, I said, well, it's pretty darn rare. I mean, this is the first prosecution of rape itself by women in the United States that I've ever heard of. Is that true? He says, yeah, I don't think there's been another case. And what happens is most often it's going to be charged with sexual assault rather than rape itself. And then the second thing to consider in these cases is that it's forced penetration, yes, but it's done with objects.
Yeah.
And that's what happened in Spokane. And according to that DA and others I've spoken with, district attorneys, the use of objects is much more common, let's say, than forced or envelopment, so to speak, which is not to say that it doesn't occur, but it's more rare, let us say,
Yeah.
than others. And then you kind of get into the whole sexual coercion thing. And, what does that mean? And there are various definitions for that. The Centers for Disease Control in the US defines it pretty darn broadly, actually, a little too broadly in my view. Nonetheless, well, let me give you a quick stat here. 1 to 5% of men reported forced vaginal anal rape, amounting to 6 to 146,000 men annually. And according to the CDC, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 71 men report attempted penetration when alcohol or drugs were involved. Now you go to the Harvard Youth Survey, and it found, this is for children, found 7% of girls and 5% of boys over a lifetime experience sexual violence by a dating partner. So you can see that statistic anyway. The rates are greater for girls, but not all that limited for boys as well in terms of dating violence.
Well, with stats like that, how can the gendered definition of the crime persist?
Well, because it does. It persists because people want it to persist. It's just that simple. Despite what the survey results, say.
Yeah.
And the same is true in terms of domestic violence as well. You have the Violence Against Women Act in the United States. There's similar acts in Great Britain, Australia, and so on. And it's always put in gendered terms. And they call it gender violence because it seems to fit a paradigm as opposed to it's female violence or male violence. It's not straightforward. Okay, we play around with words. And of course, we find that in terms of domestic violence, for example, and this has been known since 1987, when the very first nationally representative survey came out, and it's just been replicated time after time after time after time, and it becomes a matter of gender symmetry. In other words, equal numbers of males and females experience violence within their relationships, live in relationships. So it's pretty darn equal there. It's certainly greater for women to experience rape and sexual violence than it is for men, but there's a significant number, as we just saw, that experience it as well, being male.
Yeah, in my own experience, I was told to have sex at certain times, and I did it out of fear of what would happen if I didn't. So I would call that rape. I don't know, the law wouldn't, but I definitely would.
No, and that would be certainly classified, though, as sexual coercion.
Yeah,
there's no question about that. That fits the paradigm, and we find, again, fairly equal rates of sexual coercion according to Centers for Disease Control for women and men.
Well, can you give me some of the reasons why society denies the rape of men by women?
Well, you'd have to ask those who do. I don't know that I can put necessarily a finger on it. Some people call it, gender bias, basically, or gynocentrism. I think as a society, we tend to view harm for women and girls with a greater, degree of alarm and concern. It's just kind of built in, wired, if you will, okay, both by men and women, okay. Men want to be protectorates, so do women, but we had this sort of bias towards protecting women and girls first, women and girls first to the lifeboats, it's a thing. It's just kind of wired into I think, biology, if you will. So there is that component, and I don't think it should be denied. But our public policy, of course, should reflect reality in terms of that. In the domestic violence sphere, for example, men greatly fear calling the police, right? Because they're afraid they're going to be the one arrested. One of the men I interviewed, sorry, dog. One of the men I interviewed, had the knife still stuck in his back, right? She calls 911, cop arrests him, no injury to her, and then beats him up with a flashlight. Now, of course, it didn't help that the cop who responded was the one she was having an affair with.
Jesus.
So, a true story. But we find, in general, okay, beyond that, okay, we find in general that men are afraid to call the police, whether it be a sexual assault, okay, or a domestic violence incident, because they're afraid they're going to be the one arrested, regardless of her having no marks on her and him having such. And it's not an unreasonable fear. It really is not an unreasonable fear. Now, I just have anecdotal evidence, right? There's no particular survey that says, would you fear to call the police under these circumstances, right? And has not been done. However, and I think this could be true in terms of sexual assault as well, okay? A Clark University study online, again, so we don't know where, the callers called, but across the United States, 80% of those men who called a crisis line, which often includes a rape crisis line, okay, or a shelter, said, I was hung up on, I was treated as the perpetrator because it didn't happen to men. And 80% were extremely dissatisfied with the services, being provided. Now, excuse me one moment. There is, however, I have to say, some good news. And again, we don't have really comprehensive survey of this in terms of shelters and crisis lines. It just simply hasn't been done, right? And you got to be very careful about this because all of them, of course, according to federal law, and I'm sure it's the same in UK, must state that they don't discriminate on the basis of gender, all right? So you got to state that publicly. However, when tested, right, by callers and verified, and this was true in the state of California. In fact, the case went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and they affirmed that, yes, in 20 out of 21 crisis lines or shelters, they did discriminate, despite public statements to the contrary. So you got to do testing to find out, right? Public statements alone don't do it. But the good news is, and I'm quite aware of this, there is a shelter in the UK for men. Only one, but it's there. So that did not exist 10 years ago. It just didn't. Okay. There are several in the United States, one's exclusively for men, which I don't particularly think it should be. Because I think you got to treat everybody equally, but I do know, and they don't come out publicly actually very much, a number of shelters. One I went to in Arizona and spoke at, marvelous work. I mean, they treat everybody equal. They have a shelter for pets. So sometimes you don't want to leave the bad situation if you can't take your pet with you, right? That's common sense, but very few shelters do that. And of course, they're open to men as well. So I see a growing trend. It may be slow, maybe incremental, but I see a growing trend in terms of shelters and crisis lines and so on, whether it be a rape crisis line or a domestic violence crisis line, that are now open to recognizing that males, yes, can be victims as well.
That's good news. I mean, when you say that men fear the police would arrest them if they reported domestic violence, I've spoke to a few men on this show who have reported themselves have been a victim, and when the police have turned up, they've arrested them.
Yes, and a lot of that is some of it's due to just prejudice, period, right? But a lot has to do with the training that the police officers, receive. Predominant aggressor, training. Arrest the bigger, stronger person regardless. There's and I don't know if it's true or not, it's from the UK. Police officers go to a domestic disturbance and they come back, and the officer says, their chief officer says, well, who did you arrest? And they said, no one. They were both women. Well, that story is true or not, I don't know. Okay, it's a bit apocryphal, but certainly is, indicative at least of attitude. And again, it really comes down to training and these predominant aggressor policies, arrest the bigger, stronger person regardless, those kinds of things,
Yeah.
certainly temper the police response. Most are pretty good though, okay, in one sense. They are trained, okay, separate the two, talk to both parties separate from each other, right?
Yeah.
And interview both. That they generally, do a good job of. But on the other hand, sometimes, regardless of what happens to the physical assaulted person or the physically raped person, if you're a man, you're going to be less likely to be believed.
Yeah, we had the police come to a disturbance between me and my abuser, and I told them that she'd kick me, punch me, spat in my face, and threatened to stab me in the eye. And their reply to that was, "As long as you're all right now, sir." That was it.
And that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, that was it. All right. There's a. I looked at this issue quite a while back in another peer-reviewed journal. Basically, I asked a bunch of scholars and psychologists, sociologists, and so on. All right, so we have a problem. What are we going to do to address it? What's the solution, right?
Yeah.
And I think number one is training of police officers, obviously. Number two, to remove the sexist bias. Number two, obviously have crisis lines and shelters open to all. But we could also have what I would call a rapid response team. In other words, get a counselor. Just doesn't have to be a psychologist, PhD type. They're too expensive. But at least a master's level counselor. Respond with the officers to that scene. They can be on call, right, as needed. And if the officers are unsure of how to assess the situation, this other person could easily be there to help them in those terms. And then secondarily, once they get involved in the court system, often a restraining order or protective order, as they're called in some places, are issued. And that kicks at least one person out of the house and away from the children. And basically a toothbrush and, you're gone. Then a hearing takes place within about 2 weeks, fairly fast. A lot of men, and again, this is anecdotal, but a lot of men go, "Oh, well, she's forgiven me," or "It's okay now, and I'll just ignore that restraining order and won't go to the hearing," which is a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And they're really not aware of how important that is. Okay. And of course, the legal aid people tend to be helping women, not men, at the courthouse. Not always, but significantly enough. And there is very scientifically based aggressive tactics testing that can be done. Again, it doesn't have to be a PhD level, it's a master's level to interpret these things. My friend John Hamel basically created a manual, including the actual test, that anybody could get, right? And it's follow the manual, do the test, and of course you test both parties, right?
Yeah.
And they're pretty darn accurate. And it'll show the court who the predominant aggressor is, right? It'll show that both of them may be violent. And that's, boy, I tell you, mutual combat is more common than singular, right? Most of the time, it's going to be mutual combat rather than just one person against another person. So it'll indicate all of that. And at least that'll give the judge some kind of roadmap, right? As opposed to telling what to do, right? Now, you're not going to rely entirely on such a test, but at least it gives some scientific basis for making a determination as to whether that restraining order should be put in place. You should have temporary custody of the children, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well,
so I think there are solutions.
Talking about the societal view of rape and the legal definition of rape, does that have serious ramifications on sentencing?
Well, yes, of course it does. Women, by and large, serve less time for the same crime than men do, and that's been well known for years. The more serious the crime, right, the more likely the gap gets bigger. So that on average, for all types of crime, women will serve 3 years less time than men. That's on average at the most extreme, at the most serious felony level stuff. Yeah. Okay. On the more minor stuff, it gets smaller and smaller. The gap gets smaller, but it's always there. So there is a sentencing discount for women. That's certainly true. Again, anecdotally though, do you have small claims court judges there on TV in UK?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. The judge, whatever, right? Yeah. So those shows have been going on for a long time, and a lot of times it's a female judge doing the judging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's an increasing number of female judges, right? We know that.
Yeah,
that's a good thing. Again, anecdotally, I find that a female judge is more likely to impose, a strict sentence, let's say, on a woman compared to a male judge.
Right, okay.
Again, that's anecdotal stuff, right?
Yeah.
But you can watch those shows and you can kind of see it. If it's a female judge, they're not taking any BS, so they're kind of fun to watch. But it's just entertainment, it's just misdemeanor, you owe me money for the car or something, but I sense, and indeed in talking to some judges, female judges, personally, and Oregon, actually, quite a few of them. Yeah. And I found that their realization of what's actually occurring is greater than male judges.
Oh, wow. And why do you think that with all this going on, with all, with this, the bias going on, why do you think that your book is out there, but there's no other books out there? When I look on YouTube, there's very little on YouTube about men being raped by women. And I think there's an apathy amongst males out there about talking about it as well. Why do you think that is? Do you think that's social pressure?
Well, yes. There's a myth, though. I think there's a myth. And it's assumed, right, that men would be less likely to report or confide, right, when something like this happens to them compared to a woman. Well, you know what? I mean, I've talked to many, abused women as well as men and shelter workers and so on. When this occurs, I don't find them shouting it from the rooftops. Yeah. It's often hidden, right? It's a matter of embarrassment for women and men. They keep it quiet and don't even talk to their family and friends about it. All right. Oh, I got that bruise. I, got drunk and fell down when actually, something else occurred. So I don't find that to be true, at all for women when it's occurring. In other words, they're just as afraid and embarrassed and less like, it has to happen several times before they reach out and seek services or call police or even confide in anybody. It's the same for men.
Yeah.
It's the same for men, and so to think that there's this huge difference in terms of revealing, I don't think that's true at all.
Mm.
It's just not. And I'm sure it's the same for sexual assault as well. You know, uh, you know, uh, I just don't see a great deal of difference there in terms of
Yeah.
how a person might respond. Now, in terms of societal reaction to these incidents, that's another matter.
Yeah.
And there is a great deal of apathy, and the domestic violence situation regarding the first book and now the second edition. There are books, right, dealing with the subjects and a number, and there's also a number of books and several nonprofits. The 1 in 6 nonprofit comes to mind. There are others dealing with the sexual abuse of boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are books on that subject.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand that, of course, we're going to treat that kind of thing for children, right, with much greater scrutiny and look-see.
Yeah.
That's understandable and a good thing. But in terms of adult to adult, which is what I examined, didn't examine, the teacher molesting the boy student.
Yeah. Yeah.
And rape. I did not examine that at all. There was already books out there on that subject and so on. But I always wanted to examine what somebody nobody examined before, which is adult to adult.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the focus of that book.
Do you, in your research, did you find that most rapes and sexual assaults went hand in hand with domestic violence?
Again, that was not really measured.
Yeah.
Okay. And we don't have something tremendously solid in those terms, right? Mm-hmm. We could assume that they are greatly interrelated. And then certainly in terms of the anecdotal evidence, the men I interviewed, basically, it was a significant component. Yeah. But in terms of percentages, right, you've got to do a nationally representative survey, you got to ask the right questions. And the CDC found, again, fairly equal rates of sexual coercion, less rates in terms of violence, okay? But in terms of domestic violence, again, it was pretty equal. So some of the, we do have some data, but to make the correlation that this happens every time, or what percentage does it happen every time, we don't really know. And the other problem with the CDC stuff that I have, one, I think the definition of sexual coercion is too broad in many instances, but they fail to ask certain questions, and I think it's a matter of, benign neglect, or maybe intentional neglect, or half the truth is as good as the whole lie. I don't know, but they don't ask questions about scalding, for example. That's a tactic, of course, and it could be a man against a woman against a man, but anecdotally, I find that kind of thing, a pot of hot water, basically, gets thrown. And but that question isn't asked. Another question that they don't ask is poisons. They don't even ask, well, did someone attempt to poison you? Right? Yeah. Now, we could assume, and again, it's an assumption because we don't know, that women are more likely to use poisons, historically, let's say. But we don't know because they don't ask a question. They don't want to ask a question. Yeah. There's a guy interviewed who was a really old line police officer, was a rookie in the 1930s in New York. All right. So it was a long time ago. He retired when I talked to him. But so they answer, he and his partner, he's a rookie, right? And so they answer a domestic violence call. and they're going up the steps to the tenement. And a woman at the top of the stairs with a pot in her hand. And then the rookie, of course, astonished that his partner drew his gun. Now you can go through a whole police for a long time and never even used a gun, right? But he pulls the gun, tells her to put that pot down. Well, a couple of weeks earlier, another member of the squad was horribly burned on his face because the oatmeal pan contained lye, which was back in the day a common household ingredient, and they're feeding it slowly to the husband. So you should ask, the question, someone attempt to poison you? I think a good idea. And the other question they don't ask is, did your domestic partner encourage or pay someone else to cause you harm? Not asked. Not asked. Now, again, we can assume without any data that is a tactic more likely employed by women to overcome that size weight disadvantage. But we don't know because they're not asking the question. So I think there's sexist bias at the Centers for Disease Control. I think it's there. I don't know, looking at surveys in UK, the same situation probably occurs. In fact, there's a, you might want to, I don't know, move on to stalking if you want to. In the book, there was basically a list of celebrity stalkers. Okay. And I analyzed the list to find out what's the gender percentage. It turns out physical stalking, which is probably the scariest, 85% of those stalkers are men. It was true in the celebrity side, and it's probably true otherwise. Okay. In terms of there's a survey in basically US, Australia, and Great Britain. Basically, it found that stalking to be a problem for 15% of women and 2 to 4% of men. All right. Now that's physical stalking, right?
Yeah.
But I really couldn't find the much, but actually contacted a cybersecurity firm there in Great Britain and said, who, did you do a survey and what'd you find in terms of cyber stalking? What was the gender breakdown? And they found that slightly more women than men, is slightly, like 2 to 3%, use cyber stalking as opposed to physical stalking. So the majority of physical stalkers are men, right? 85%. But when it comes to cyber stalking, stealing passwords, harassing emails, threatening, I'm going to tell, your boss or your whatever, that you're a whatever. Okay. And that is a tactic slightly more likely used by women than compared to men.
And back to the scolding, I know that happens because I've spoken to men that it's happened to, and I've spoken to the abused men in Scotland organization, and they have a lot of phone calls about scolding. So about scolding, about throwing kettles of boiling water over their male partners, and so that's a tactic done by women, big time.
Yeah, and it should be obviously, the Centers for Disease Control and other responsible organizations concerned with health should ask the question.
Yeah, definitely.
Why not? Let's find out. But
they're important questions not being answered. Yeah.
Yes, and I think that shows sexual, it's bias. I had there's no other explanation for it in terms of that. Again, though, 10 years ago, in just that short of time, really 10 years, it was common practice at the physician's office or hospital. Do you feel safe at home? That question is commonly asked,
Yeah.
but only of women, 10 years ago. But now, okay, hospitals and doctors are asking that question of men as well. I mean, it's pretty much across the board. They're going to ask that question, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of that type of progress, that's great. Here's another problem, though. I don't know what it is in the UK, okay, or Australia, but I do know the United States that the persons referred to, okay, it's a domestic violence hotline. It's called, it's a national, toll-free number, right? And people are under the misconception that calling that, you're going to get advice. No, what it is a referral to a local agency. I don't know who to call locally, right? So they're going to give you the number of a local helping agency, right? But the National Domestic Violence Hotline here doesn't care to find out whether or not the local shelter or crisis line serves men or not. They don't care to know. So they're sending this man off to a place, at least according to Clark University survey, 80% were extremely dissatisfied with the services being provided.
Yeah.
And, they don't know, and they don't care to know, what the person they're referring to, serves men or really serves men or not. They don't even ask the question in their internal stuff, just, what are your operating hours and things like that. And bizarrely, I mean, this is truly bizarre, a significant number, probably about 30%, okay, according to their own survey documents at the domestic violence hotline, about 30% of shelters prohibit a woman entering the shelter with a boy, their son, over the age of 12.
Oh wow! Yeah, I think they do that here.
Think what that does to the woman.
Yeah.
And what, these young boys are toxic and can't be around women or girls, and this poor mother is left with a draconian choice of, staying with the abuser, if that's the case, or leaving the son with the abuser. What? It's an incredible sexist bias. And actually, of course, what does discrimination do? Well, it discriminates and hurts everybody.
Yeah.
And that's just it. So it's astonishing sometimes, to me at least, what our policies do.
It's an awful situation to be in for everybody concerned, really, isn't it?
Well, certainly, and in terms of, I think we just have to realize that we're all human beings. We have failures, we have problems. Most of us, we think sometimes that, oh my goodness, domestic violence, it's a tremendous and terrible problem, and it is. But really, when you delve down into it, and it's true with sexual assault as well, okay, it's a minority. It is a minority. It's not. I'm sorry, most of us, we stop at stoplights for kind animals, we'll help an elderly person across the street, these things are daily occurrences, right? But of course, they don't make the news because the news is what is unusual. We don't talk about the number of planes that don't crash.
Yeah.
We don't pay attention, but if it does crash, oh boy, we're there. And you get into the area of false accusations. okay, which can be extremely devastating. I was talking to several lawyers actually, and one of them said, well, so what is the percentage of false accusations in terms of sexual assault or in that respect? And he says, well, between 1% and 5%, because that'd be the average of all false accusations, And another survey found it up to 8%. Another survey found it to 50%. Women against men in terms of false accusation. That was an Air Force study, and it's a little iffy. I think that's too high. Okay.
Yeah.
But the lawyer's point was, well, look, when you say it's 1%, or 5% that are actually false in terms of all crime. Well, if 1% of the airplanes fell out of the sky, it'd be a national uproar.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, right. So, the judicial system is not, the airlines have got a better safety record than the judicial system does. Let's put it that way. I did this first ever analysis of those from a group it's not Project Innocence or these other ones that are attempting to, get somebody out who was falsely accused of a crime. Yeah. These are actual cases in which that person was exonerated, right? And male or female. And so I did an analysis of that and called them up and said, well, check my percentages. My math is sometimes not so great. And they did, okay. And it was about 26%, okay, of those freed from prison who were falsely accused of sexual assault or rape. And, they were finally got out. And about an equal number percentage of those accused of sexually molesting children. Now, this is only 1,500 people, right? Let out, convictions overturned, falsely charged with the crime. And so we're only examining that small cohort.
Yeah.
Right. I can't say that that's true for the general population, right? But it's, it's noteworthy nonetheless.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then you look at the little national surveys that we do have, and the lawyers tend to agree, somewhere between 1 to 5, maybe 8% of all such, whether it be sexual assault or other kinds of crimes, are false. And why would anybody do that to another person?
And with a false accusation, what happens to the accuser?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they don't get persecuted for perjury. It's very rare. It has happened. Okay. It has happened. Famous football player, 60 Minutes did a survey, did his story. No, she was not charged, accused him of rape. He went to prison. Then she confessed that, after 5 years, no, it was all made up. And it was really after money from this college. And they got the money and they had to pay the money back. But she spent no time in jail. And of course, he lost his chances at a pro football career, gone. The local team here in Washington, Seattle Seahawks coach, really appreciate this, I think. Coach Carroll allowed this young man to try out for the team. And of course, the years had gone. It's a young man's game and he didn't make it. But I sure appreciate the coach give him that opportunity at least.
Yeah. It does ruin people's lives, even if they're proved innocent. Like you say, it's ruining people's lives.
Yes. And I, of course, it's a two-edged sword, right? The victim of such an accusation, when it's false, gets no justice, right? Because there's no punishment. maybe some money restitution if you can afford it. You're famous or whatever, a libel case or slander case. But that's only for the that's only for the rich folks. You can't. The average Joe is not going to be able to do a slander or libel suit. It's not going to happen. So there is that. But then the two-edged sword, of course, is that it demonizes and hurts women, right, who have a story to tell and are victims of crime, because if you've got this false allegation stuff going on, that lessens their chances of seeming to be credible. So it's a two-edged sword, and until judges or legislators put laws into effect and enforce them, and there's real consequences and punishment for false accusations, then nothing's much going to change in that regard. That's a certainty. Now you got to be careful, of course. Delving into who's credible, who's not, right, is a sticky wicket, to use a British phrase. Because making that determination is not easy, right? Because it's a he said, she said situation, or he said, and she said, getting down to what the truth is often, quite difficult. However, things are changing. And with cell phones being so ubiquitous that everybody's got one, right? They all come with a camera, and they all can do video or audio recordings, right, in your pocket. Basically, we all have body cams now. It can't be done. And I'm glad the police are being forced to use body cams. Sometimes they turn them off, but basically it's pretty much required around the at least Western world. And I think people, men, are being more cautious than they used to be in a number of levels. And of course, one of them is recording or videotaping a situation so that they can protect themselves against such. And when you got that kind of evidence, then it's less of a sticky wicket in terms of finding out who's telling the truth and who's not.
However, when I went to see the police about my abuse, I gave the police several photos of my flat smashed up, and they said it was evidence of things knocked over, and you could tell that it was like smashed up. And I also gave them an 11-minute recording of her berating me and screaming verbal abuse at me, and they didn't take any notice.
Yeah, if it's going to be ignored, it's going to be ignored.
Yeah.
But at least you and others have a chance with that. I mean, without that, right, you got nothing. You got nothing. And that's why it's important for stalking victims, for example, to document. That's some good advice there. Document everything. I mean, you may not want to look at it, see the screenshot of the TikTok or the whatever, right? But keep it so that protective order can be maintained if necessary, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's you got to document as much as you can.
One fascinating stat that I found in your book was that 60% of male rapists were molested by a female. And I found that fascinating. Is that the same as like most abusers have been abused?
Yes. Well, we've known for a long time, of course, that mothers are the predominance, around 70% of child abusers. Now, that doesn't mean it's a sexist propensity for mothers, okay? But they're 85%, right, of all child care primary providers.
Yeah.
Right? We're married or not, those frustrations can build. And so it stands to reason that in terms of all physical and neglect, the majority of those perpetrators are mothers. Next in line, though, is not biological fathers in those terms. It's live-in boyfriends and stepfathers.
Yeah.
Right. When you get down to the nitty-gritty of it in terms of child abuse, not sexual abuse, but child abuse and neglect, the percentage of biological fathers committing such act is only slightly higher than other caregivers or other relatives. So I think there's it's a disconnect there in terms of protecting children and who should be looked at.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you asked a question and I don't think I answered it.
Oh, I was just saying that the fascinating fact that 60% were 60% of rapists were molested by women.
Yeah, and that's it's obviously if we want to prevent male rapists, right, we should look at in terms of the childhood component. There's a lot of anger obviously built up.
Yeah.
And it comes out in the forms of violence against adult women. But what happened in childhood was the really important component of that. And not to say that there aren't male child molesters, of course there are, right? But so we've got to look at the entire picture, and halting that kind of heinous activity is of high importance. I won't tell you this story because it's so heinous that it keeps me awake at night, but this judge, we're having lunch, and this judge, I don't know, maybe she didn't have anybody else to talk to. She's doing family court, and including child abuse and stuff. And she told me this story, and it was just, I couldn't believe it. It's just so heinous against a child. But she pointed out that, and of course, she sentenced the male perpetrator, right? Harshest thing, gave him the harshest sentence she could find. There wasn't much she could do about the mother, though. And the mother stood by, and allowed this to happen.
Yeah.
To this child. And there wasn't much she could do in terms of her sentencing. She did get a sentence, but the charge was much less because she didn't actually commit the act. So there's a certain element of standbyism, is what she called it.
Yeah.
The judge called it a certain element of standbyism that's there. And I suspect, again, don't have data, but I suspect that more often occurs in the live-in boyfriend type situation than it does with a biological father. We don't know, but based on the anecdotal evidence that I've been able to gather, that would seem to be the case.
Yeah. And one final question is, we've talked about the societal views of sexual assault and rape of men. We've talked about the legal definition. How can we change both those? How can we change societal views, and how can we change the legal definition? And do you think it ever will change?
The legal definition is slowly changing, at least in the United States. Okay. It's become a bit more expansive than it was. Okay. We still don't have forced envelopment as a crime. That's true. It's forced penetration.
Yeah.
But a significant change was made in terms of the definition regarding that in the United States. It's slowly changing. And what it means really is that the sexual assault of boys by, say, the teacher kind of scenario and others is now included. Okay, so that's a significant step, and it's certainly a good one. It needs to be expanded further. Will it? Who knows? You know, it's a slow process. I mean, judicial process, legal process is just, you know, hurry up and wait. You know, that's just how that's the way it is about many of those issues. So will it change to be more expansive and inclusive? I think it will, but it's going to take some time. Yeah. You know, it's going to take some time, but there is progress. Okay. There is progress. So it's not entirely to be unexpected. In terms of the, I guess you asked me, you know, will the societies, you know, change our view of these things? Will there be a, you know, deeper appreciation and delve into the science of what we actually know, okay, of these issues and how to address them? Well, when the very first edition of Abused Men came out, I did, you know, quite a few, you know, mainstream media, television, and radio interviews. Okay, quite a few. And I won't mention his name because it doesn't matter. He's no longer on the air. Who cares? A pretty big, you know, talk show, national broadcast. And the first time I appeared, oh, he laughed. Oh, that never happens. You know, he's a big guy. That never happens. Men don't can't get abused by a woman, you know, and so on and so forth. He just laughed. Well, say 3 years later, I appeared again in his program. Different story. He took it seriously. He got some stats. Now they were a little skewy. Okay, less than actually what was reported. Didn't matter, but he took it seriously. Yeah. Quite a change. And I find that, at least in terms of the domestic violence sphere, there is this, you know, societal awareness change. There's just no doubt in my mind, you know, that it happens to men too. You know, we're much more accepting in society of that. Now, in terms of the adult to adult sexual assault, we got a long ways to go. We got a long ways to go. You know, it's a slow evolution awareness. And you know, I appreciate you having me on because you know, it's one more little brick in the wall.
My pleasure. So my final question is, what has the future in store for Philip Cook?
Oh, well, I'm really enjoying the Global Initiative for Boys and Men stuff. It's great to be with these younger people. Yeah, they bring so much enthusiasm and skills technologically. You know, I'm glad the microphone works. You know, and I can do a Zoom thing. You know, at my age, that's remarkable. But you know, Mr. Techie ain't me. But you know, these people are, and it's great, and they're, you know, doing just really wonderful work in terms of increasing our awareness of what discrimination looks like for both sexes. And it's really been a fun, just 2-year journey with the Global Initiative for Boys and Men. It's just, by the way, anybody wants to know, it's it's easy. www.gibm.us. And that's us. That's us. It's the US, but us.
And
so take a look. You'll like
it. Definitely. I'll definitely take a look, and I ask my viewers to take a look as well. And I'll leave a link to your books at the end of this video as well.
Yes, my website, Mr. Techie Non Me, is down. So I can't give you that. So just link it to Amazon and it'll work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Philip, thank you for joining me today. It was awesome talking to you. Very fascinating. Thanks so much for everything you're doing for men and boys as well.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you. Bless you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.